Rose Garden, and welcome to Creative Writing Lessons. I'm Avalon Roselin, indie author, and your instructor for the evening. In this video, we will expand upon plot structure, specifically focusing on Act 1 of the typical 3-act structure. More simply, we will focus on how to begin a story, what information is most vital to impart to readers early on, and go over some of the more famous and infamous openings to stories. As with all creative writing lessons, I strongly recommend adapting the material of this video for your own process. Not every piece of advice is helpful for every author or every story. Act 1 of a 3-act structure typically establishes the protagonist's motivations or goals, the initial conflict that prevents them from achieving said goals, and the setting. It concludes with some kind of change to the protagonist's starting circumstance that kickstarts the 2nd act, where the protagonist will face different obstacles or challenges on their path to pursuing what it is that they want. The 1st act is the foundation of the story that allows the reader time to become familiar with the world and characters, and develop some kind of connection so they care about what happens to the protagonist. The more and more time I spend in reader spaces, the more I see that what readers care about more than anything else in their stories is characters. Plenty of readers will gladly follow an interesting character doing the most mundane things, but complex plots and detailed world-building will often fail to engage reader interest if they don't care about the characters in them. Let's talk a little bit more now about what specific elements you may want to focus on here and why they matter to draw readers in. Character motivation. Typically, what the protagonist wants drives the rest of the story forward. This is the character that the reader is following, so they should have a sense of what the character desires, why they want that, and what they're willing to do to get it. Now, the start of a story is just that, the starting point. The motivations and goals of the protagonist can change as the story progresses and priorities shift. But this initial look into the character's deepest wants can reveal a lot about them to the reader, which will help form connections and interest. Character circumstance. The second, equally important side to this is the character's circumstances. Rarely do we form our opinions, goals, and motives in a vacuum. The space that the character occupies within the world of their story will usually have a significant impact on their goal, their ability to achieve it, and their methods of pursuing it. Typically, this includes some kind of initial conflict. If there was nothing standing in the way of the lead getting what they want, then there would be no story. And to establish this, you of course need to also establish the setting. In simplest terms, setting is where and when the story takes place. In more specific terms, setting is how that affects the protagonist. What is the protagonist's background? Are they a streetwise orphan in the 1800s who has been surviving by wit and cunning? Do they come from a modern-day middle-class family where they are expected to pursue a certain career path after leaving public schooling? Are they a nature spirit living at the edge of a village that is looking to expand into their forest? When crafting the start of your story, think of setting not only as the when and where, but as a force that impacts the characters and plot. One example that comes to mind immediately is Death Note. From the very first page, the reader is given information about both the characters and setting. There is a world of Shinigami where monstrous beings are sitting around a wasteland. The next panel is of our protagonist, Light Yagami, looking out a window of a classroom where, likewise, there are many people sitting in a room. The text reads, "Same old thing, day after day. What a bore," from Ryuk's perspective, and "This world is a rotten mess," from Light's. From this very first moment, the reader can understand that this is a world in which fantastical beings exist, but are separate from the real world of modern-day Japan, and that both characters, Ryuk and Light, desire some kind of change because they are unsatisfied with their current environment. The first chapter is even titled Boredom. The rest of the chapter goes on to expand upon the rules of the setting, what the Death Note can do, what Shinigami are and how they live, and the characters' motivations. Ryuk is simply bored, and Light wants to create the world he envisions using the Death Note's power. At the very end, the reader gets a first glimpse of Light's antagonist L, but no solid information in order to create questions and speculation, to let the reader use their own imagination to come up with what-ifs and questions about the direction of the story. Everything the reader needs to understand and be invested in the story is present in this first chapter. Let's look at another example that I'm deeply familiar with, Cinderella Boy. This time we'll take a look at the first chapter and then go a bit further beyond it. After all, the first act isn't only the first chapter. Cinderella Boy begins within the story of Cinderella. Everything is as you would expect. Fancy dresses, a prince and a queen lamenting over the missing would-be bride, and the quest to find the woman who fits the shoe. Only for the main character Chase, wearing modern clothing and wielding a cell phone, to appear. The characters around him do not notice or remark upon this, letting the reader know that to them everything appears as it should be. We even get an example of storybook vision shortly after, when Chase's antagonist Buddy appears to cause the plot complications expected of the story. This opening takes a story and scenario that readers are already familiar with and subverts it, juxtaposing the fairy tale setting with a modern-day protagonist to create interest and comedy. Many of the elements that are needed for a compelling beginning are still here. We have our protagonist, a rudimentary understanding of the setting and how the protagonist interacts with it, and an opposing force for the protagonist to work off of. What Cinderella Boy does that I find interesting is that it holds out on revealing Chase's motive for a few chapters. Creator Punko has commented that she wanted the reader to form an opinion of Chase separate from his motivation before revealing it. At the very start, Chase is introduced as a fairly standard teenager. He's bored in his small hometown and dreams of stardom, which he can achieve by going into books to gather serotonin until he has enough to grant a wish. However, it is then revealed that he has something more important to use his wish for. It isn't until the 10th chapter or so that this is revealed. His mother has cancer, and if he doesn't use the wish to save her, she will die. Chase getting his wish now has a motive that readers can connect to, as well as stakes and a time limit, which can increase reader interest. Now let's take a look at some examples of openings in Western literature, and not just my own interests. I'm using Times Now News' article, 10 Books with Unforgettable Opening Scenes That Hook You from the Start by Girish Shukla to source this list, and I recommend reading them to see what does and does not work about these scenes for you. Yes, this video comes with homework. Remember that this list is being evaluated for the impact of the book's opening scenes, not their overall quality. The setting is a huge factor in 1984, and the opening wastes no time introducing the reader to the dystopian society and how it affects protagonist Winston Smith. The opening lines of The Catcher in the Rye focus on the character of Holden Caulfield. Love him or hate him, the reader is left with a distinct impression of the protagonist right away. The Road establishes both its setting and stakes very clearly, as the first thing the protagonist does upon waking in the post-apocalyptic world is check on his child. Survival is already an important motivating factor for many, including a child doubles those stakes. Pride and Prejudice has one of the most famous opening lines in history. Do I really need to elaborate? If I do, the opening to Pride and Prejudice establishes that marriage will be a central plot point and provides the social commentary that Austen was so known for. The reader is immediately thrust into another dystopia in Fahrenheit 451, where books are banned and burned, and the protagonist takes immense pleasure in doing his job of burning them. Rebecca begins with a dream sequence describing the now overgrown grounds of Manderley, and with the distinct sense that something went horribly wrong there, as the protagonist narrates, When I thought of Manderley in my waking hours, I would not be bitter. I should think of it as it might have been, could I have lived there without fear. The reader has questions, and the story has the answers. A rocky marriage is always a tense subject. Gone Girl's opening makes it clear that despite celebrating their 5th year of marriage, Nick does not understand Amy and possibly does not even love her. This is juxtaposed by Amy's own journal entries from years prior, which follow how they met and fell in love. And the tension only grows when Amy disappears. Who doesn't love the appearance of a mysterious circus to kick off a story? The Night Circus delivers the expectation of whimsical magic and delights of fancy, establishing setting and tone right from the first page. When it comes to establishing initial conflicts, there are very few that are more engaging and dire than a dead body, and why the protagonist's friend group would want someone dead in The Secret History. It brings questions to the reader's mind at once. What was the motive for murder? Who was Bunny? Will the protagonist get caught? The only way to find out is to continue reading. As in Catcher in the Rye, The Martian immediately introduces the reader to the voice of the protagonist with the line, "I'm pretty much fucked," before explaining that astronaut Mark Watney is trapped on Mars with no hope of rescue. Motivation, circumstance, setting, all checked, and with a dose of dark humor to boot. Those were some of the best and most memorable openings. Now let's take a look at some of the worst and see what it is they did wrong. Remember that if your own story utilizes some of the same tactics or devices, that does not automatically mean it is bad or will not be successful. After all, it is commonly advised not to start a story with a dream sequence, but Rebecca does it quite well. It was a bit harder to source a list because most of the results I could find stopped at bad opening lines rather than full scenes and did not elaborate on why they were bad. So I'm going to have to be a bit subjective and provide my own list. Yes, I said it. The opening to the first Harry Potter book sucks. While it does establish that there is a hidden magical world alongside our own and something of great importance has happened there, for some reason it plods along with the Dursleys until Dumbledore can show up and drop exposition on why there's weird stuff happening. Probably because our protagonist is, at this point in time, an infant with no agency of his own, and it gives away the reveal that he is from the magical other world. Cut the first chapter out of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, and you have a much better book with some actual mystery for the reader for why strange events happen later when Harry is actually old enough to participate. I might be cheating a little bit here because the entire book is bad, but the opening to 50 Shades of Grey is unbearable. Anastasia has no goal linked to giving Grey the interview. She isn't even on the student newspaper, and she has no significant opinions on anything that might lead to an interesting encounter. She doesn't even read the questions Kate gives her ahead of time and alter them in any way. She just reads what's on the paper in front of her. This detachment does not make for an interesting character. She is only there because the plot demands it. I know it's a movie and not a book, but somehow Palpatine Returned from The Rise of Skywalker deserves a place here. Not only is the concept of Emperor Palpatine returning to the franchise a lazy attempt to draw interest out of fans of the original Star Wars films, but it isn't even explained. There's no build-up to it. The filmmakers can't even be arsed to tell us how it happened. He's just back now. Why? Because reasons. How? Unclear. But here's a familiar character from the franchise for the final installment, here without context or continuity to the other two films in the trilogy. What is lacking in these examples? Well, they don't introduce the protagonist as someone with agency to affect the story. The opening scenes of both Harry Potter and 50 Shades have things happening to their characters that are in no way connected to their goals or motivations, because they have none. The Rise of Skywalker is a bit different because it's the third film in a trilogy, so the characters are already established. but those characters are not given any opportunity to affect the events that kick off this movie. They didn't attempt to stop Palpatine from being cloned and fail. They didn't even have any knowledge that this was a possible outcome. So it leaves the audience with the impression that the characters were sidelined. In summary, it is good practice to start your story with a focus on your main character, who they are, what they want, and how they are affected by the world around them. This will allow your reader to form connections early on. This also allows the reader some time to observe the world through the lead's interaction with it in order to understand any key details that will be important to the story. What are some of your favorite, or least favorite, opening scenes in fiction? What draws you into a story? Leave a comment below to let me know, and keep growing until next time, Rose Garden.